Joining us is Nomfundo Mogapi, clinical psychologist and founder of the Center for Mental Wellness and Leadership. Nomfundo, appreciate your time this afternoon. Now, one of the conversations we've been having speaks to a clip that we've just watched in which one of the individuals who lost a relative speaks about living in Lusikisiki in fear of his life. Let's talk about the trauma that shootings like this, where 18 people are massacred from a single family in a small village, and just how people can cope with this.
Yeah, Hugo, I mean, just my heart goes out. We had done some work there in Lusikisiki around gender-based violence. And I can just, even in my head, just see those families. And as you are saying, it is a close-knit community. And when we are looking at this, you know, the way we describe trauma is that it's when you go through those experiences where you experience the unspeakable. You don't even have a language for it. We call it the wound of the soul. And there are certain wounds that hit so deep. And this particular wound is not just a wound of grief, it's a wound of trauma, but not just of trauma, but collective trauma. So I think the first thing is just to really appreciate the depth and extent of work that these families will have to do moving forward. Yes, there are immediate needs that everyone is focusing on now, like being able to bury their loved one, ensuring their own safety. But also we're really calling of anyone who's supporting that the journey is going to be long, and we need to just gang up so that we can support these families in South Africa.
Now, a couple of thoughts come to mind at Nomfundo. You've obviously talked about having worked with the community in Lusikisiki regarding gender-based violence issues. Now, of the 18 that lost their lives, 15 were women. So clearly, this is an issue. What were you able to unpack from working with the people of Lusikisiki in your efforts to deal with GBV?
So I think one of the things that emerged was that GBV was just but a symptom of a bigger societal problem. It was a community that had deep-seated historical traumas. A lot of the people there have moved from their villages to come to Lusikisiki as a town where they had hope that they will help the community to get out of poverty. So some of them have left their families behind. There's a lot of young people going there looking for schooling, high levels of drug and young people. The other thing, one of the chiefs said really something powerful to say that there was a lot of young people who lost their parents during the HIV and AIDS pandemic, and the grandmothers had to take care of them, but there was no support for that collective trauma. Then there was COVID-19 that came, but also Lusikisiki and the history of that community has historical wars that they had fought and never really dealt with them. Take all of this and then combine these issues of poverty, because Lusikisiki is the height of contestation around getting out of poverty, because people feel that that's where they can possibly have hope. So those were some of the things that we identified, and we had said that to deal with GBV and violence generally, there needs to be work in going to work with the communities and supporting and building a relationship between the communities and the police, the communities and taxi drivers, because a lot of the taxi drivers said we want to come and help because we're the ones that hear stories around where possible violence could be coming.
Now, first responders face the trauma of witnessing these incidents up close. What support systems should be in place for them to cope with the mental health challenges that arise from repeated exposure to violence? In fact, just to take you back a little bit, my colleague earlier spoke to the mothers of one of the victims. Now, she was in a room adjacent to the room where her daughter was sadly brutally murdered. How does an individual live through all of that?
So I think, first of all, we really just have to have that appreciation that just even listening to those sounds, being able to, because the person has to deal with their own fear for their life and being faced with the possibility that they could have died, and then having to deal with two things, the trauma of losing their child, but also the grief. So there is going to be a journey of facilitating grief, such as really ensuring that all the rituals, unfortunately, in our community, and I know in Lusikisiki, there are certain rituals of making sure the person is buried properly. So I heard, the young men asking, give us money to bury our loved ones. We cannot overestimate the importance of being able to be given the support of burying their loved ones with dignity, because that rituals helps to heal. And there's other rituals that actually need to take place to support the families. And then the second thing is then getting support and counseling. I know there are social workers. We trained about 50 social workers in Lusikisiki to be trauma-informed. And I really hope they will come. There's an organization called the SGPVF combat team that we've also trained that are also there. So I think the important thing is, how do we connect these families with that support system so they can be able to be supported as they go. Some of them might even need psychiatric assistance, because when you go through such deep trauma, it takes long, it creates injury in the brain, and it takes longer for the brain to repair itself and create the capacity to heal you. So they might need psychiatrists to give them support. And I know that there isn't sufficient psychiatrists there. So really calling for the Department of Health to even send psychiatric assistance and even medication where they can need. And finally, I know they have a chief there who's very active and is looking at supporting, how do we bring in the traditional leaders to come in and also be able to support the communities.
Now, obviously, as a clinical psychologist, you understand how the mind works, and obviously to a very large extent how criminals operate. The Deputy Police Commissioner, I think that's her title, spoke earlier and seems to be uncertain about what are the causes of violence in Lusikisiki. I mean, they have a police station that's been built, that's been there, I think, for about 5 years, but they're unable to bring the numbers down. They're unaware from what she said of what it is that's causing the levels of crime that we're witnessing in the area, particularly the brutal crime and savage killing of innocent individuals. Do you have a take on this, on what are some of those causes?
So I think the thing that we've been saying as people who work with violence prevention for the longest time is that the prevention of violence cannot just be held with the police. Definitely, we need functioning police to deter those that are likely to cause crime. But there are other things. The first thing, as I said, that we saw, there's a huge problem of drugs in that community. How do you bring in these young men who never grow up? They grow up with their grandmothers. They are angry. We have a crisis of just bringing in some kind of healing, and most of them don't have adults, or abomadume, because they've left them at home back in the villages. So how do you really raise elders who can be able to speak to these young men? Of course, the issue of unemployment and poverty, you have to deal with healing and also address the issues of unemployment and poverty to ensure that you're pulling people out of poverty. But also just generally, and as a clinical psychologist who talk about wounding, I've always said that if we want to prevent violence in South Africa, we've got to go back and heal these multiple layers of wounding, which when they are combined with poverty, they become a toxic ingredient for later causing violence. So we need to combine both of those. And there is research. There is the study that we've done. There are other researchers around Lusikisiki. The Department of Social Development did some work, Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. So maybe the Deputy Minister can just go to that research.
I think the police will be challenged to engage with you, or certainly look at that research.